The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, a cold, mechanical vibration that cut through the quiet hum of the morning. I picked it up, expecting a routine message, maybe a reminder or a casual "how are you?" from my dad. But nothing could have prepared me for the words that appeared on the screen, stark and jagged like a knife. "I disown you. Talk to my lawyer." I froze. The words were short, clipped, almost efficient, as if emotion had been scrubbed from them entirely. My heart pounded, and a cold knot settled deep in my stomach. I read the text again, slowly, hoping some part of me had misread it. Maybe he was joking, but the lack of punctuation, the clinical detachment of it, screamed certainty. This wasn't a miscommunication. This was a verdict. I sank onto the kitchen stool, gripping my phone as if it could anchor me to reality. Memories flooded back. Years of subtle slights, comparisons to my siblings, the silent judgment whenever I dared to speak my mind. I remembered birthdays where my accomplishments were minimized, times he laughed off my struggles, and the countless occasions I'd turned to him hoping for warmth, only to be met with cold expectation. And yet I had always hoped that beneath his rigid exterior, beneath the sharp words and the relentless criticism, he still loved me. Apparently, I had been wrong. I typed a simple reply, "Okay." It was the only word that felt right. Not defiance, not apology, just acknowledgement. I didn't know if it would anger him further or confuse him, but at that moment, it felt like the only way to keep my composure. I stared at the screen after hitting send, my mind a whirl of hurt and disbelief. The house was silent, but I could hear the echoes of my past in every corner. I walked slowly to my father's study, hesitating at the threshold, staring at the mahogany desk where he conducted his empire of spreadsheets and investments. I had spent years idolizing the sharpness of his mind, the way he could bend numbers to his will, the respect he commanded in the business world. And now I realized that same mind, that same respect, had no space for me, not as a child, not as a human being. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes and I swallowed them. I hated that I was crying, hated that the betrayal hurt this much. But I couldn't deny it. The man who had taught me to chase precision, to value discipline, to trust in numbers more than people, had disowned me with a few cold words. I sank to the floor, letting the grief wash over me in waves. But beneath the raw pain, beneath the sting of rejection, a small ember began to glow. A quiet, simmering resolve. If he thought that a text could erase me, if he believed I would simply vanish, he had gravely underestimated me. I didn't know yet what I would do or how, but I knew one thing. Nothing about this betrayal would go unanswered. The first night after the text, I barely slept. My mind was a tangle of anger, hurt, and disbelief, but also curiosity. How could a man who had built his empire on precision and control make such a reckless, cruel move against his own child? I decided I wouldn't act out of raw emotion. No, I would watch. I would learn. I would wait. Over the next few days, I began paying attention to details I had long ignored. The small, telltale signs that something in his world wasn't as perfect as it seemed. A late night call from a bank, hushed conversations that abruptly stopped when I entered the room, the slight tension in his posture whenever he mentioned the family finances. These were subtle cracks, tiny glimpses into a life I had always assumed was untouchable. I started keeping notes, small observations jotted in a notebook I hid in my room. There were discrepancies, tiny ones at first, almost imperceptible, accounts that didn't balance, transactions that seemed unnecessary, money moving from places it shouldn't. I felt a chill every time I realized how carefully he had covered his tracks, how deeply he trusted no one. And yet the more I looked, the more obvious it became. My father, the man who preached honesty and discipline, was hiding something. Then, one evening, while pretending to do laundry, I noticed a series of emails on his laptop, accounts flagged, withdrawal requests, investment summaries. My pulse quickened as I scrolled through them carefully, hiding behind the doorway. And there it was, a fund that didn't belong to him, $85,000 siphoned quietly over the last year, disguised in transfers that looked legitimate on paper. My chest tightened, anger surged, hot and sharp, cutting through the lingering sting of rejection. This wasn't just financial deceit. This was betrayal on every level. A man who had promised to protect his family, who had taught me to trust in numbers and integrity, had stolen from the very people who depended on him. And he had the audacity to disown me. I felt a cold satisfaction begin to coil in my stomach. Knowledge is power, they say, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of control. I wasn't powerless anymore. I was patient, calculating, and armed with evidence he had never imagined I could uncover. Yet, beneath the thrill of discovery, there was a quiet moral struggle. Should I confront him immediately? Should I take this straight to the authorities? Or should I wait, craft a plan that would hit him where it hurt the most, where pride and money intersected? The questions gnawed at me, but I knew one thing: impulsive action was dangerous. He was clever, ruthless, and nothing about him could be underestimated. So I watched, I waited, I observed. Every word he said, every gesture, every financial move became part of a map I was slowly drawing. A map that would eventually lead to the truth, and to the revenge he had unknowingly invited. By the end of the week, I felt a subtle shift inside me. The shock had faded, replaced by something sharper: purpose. I was no longer the child begging for approval. I was a storm gathering quietly, invisible but inevitable, ready to strike when the moment was right. And the moment would come. By the time the weekend arrived, I had become almost invisible in the house. My father, proud and oblivious, moved through his routines unaware that I had discovered his secret. He believed he still held all the power, but I had learned something he hadn't counted on. Patience is a weapon, and knowledge is sharper than anger. I spent hours compiling evidence, bank statements, emails, transaction logs. I documented everything meticulously, making sure that each piece of the puzzle fit together. I double-checked every number, every date, every withdrawal, because a single mistake could turn justice into disaster. As I worked, memories of his harsh words and cold disregard played in my mind, fueling a quiet rage that made my hands steady and my resolve unshakable. I began crafting subtle moves, small tests to gauge how aware he was of my observation. I asked seemingly casual questions about accounts, noting how he deflected or hesitated. I sent minor text messages designed to provoke a reaction, seeing the slight twitch in his responses when I hinted at looking into things or reviewing old investments. He was arrogant enough to dismiss my inquiries, too proud to suspect that I might actually understand his financial web. Late one night, I overheard him on the phone, speaking in tones that dripped with false bravado. "I've taken care of everything. No one will ever find out," he said, his voice tinged with smug confidence. My stomach churned at the audacity of it, but it also strengthened my determination. He had underestimated me at every turn, and he would regret it. The more I observed, the more I realized how carefully he had built his fortress of control and how fragile it truly was. His pride, his need to appear untouchable, left cracks I could exploit. Every mismanaged account, every transfer disguised as legitimate, was the thread I could pull. I didn't need to yell, confront, or plead. I just needed the perfect moment to reveal everything, and then I began planting seeds. Small hints in conversations, questions in public spaces, veiled references to oversight committees and audits. Nothing that could be traced back to me directly, but enough to create doubt, enough to make him tense in private, wondering if someone was watching. The psychological pressure began to mount. His composure wavered ever so slightly whenever I was nearby, and I savored it silently. Through it all, I reminded myself that revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice, about reclaiming the dignity he had tried to strip from me. Each careful move was a balance between intellect and emotion, a dance I had rehearsed in my mind countless times. The storm inside me was no longer aimless anger. It was precision, patience, and strategy. By the end of the week, I was ready. Every piece of evidence was organized, every conversation tracked, and every subtle nudge had tested his reactions. The trap was set, not a reckless, impulsive trap, but a calculated one. When I finally revealed the $85,000 fund theft, it would be public, undeniable, and irreversible. And as I looked at my father, unaware and arrogant in his office, I realized that the child he had disowned was no longer powerless. I had the truth, I had control, and I had the satisfaction of knowing that he would never see it coming. The day I had waited for arrived with quiet inevitability. My father was seated in his study, surrounded by the polished veneer of wealth and power, completely unaware that the empire he believed untouchable was about to crumble. I walked in calmly, carrying the evidence I had painstakingly gathered over weeks: statements, emails, spreadsheets, all organized with surgical precision. Every number, every transfer, every hidden withdrawal was laid bare. "Dad," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the storm inside me, "we need to talk about the $85,000 fund." He looked up, startled. "Fund? What are you talking about?" His tone was carefully controlled, a thin veneer of casualness masking the sudden tension that flickered in his eyes. I placed the folder on his desk. "This one." He froze for a moment, then quickly laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You don't understand these numbers. Let me handle it." "I understand perfectly," I replied, pulling out the spreadsheets and emails. "And it's not just the numbers. It's the betrayal, the lies, and the fact that you had the audacity to disown me while stealing from your own family." For the first time, I saw fear or something like it flash across his face. He leaned back in his chair, trying to regain control. "You think you can threaten me with this? You don't have any proof." I slid the folder closer. "Every transfer, every account, every manipulation. It's all here, and I've made copies." The silence in the room was deafening. The father who had always controlled everything with precision was suddenly vulnerable, stripped of his carefully constructed power. He reached for the phone, probably to call a lawyer, but I shook my head. "This isn't going to lawyers. This is truth. Everyone involved will know, and it will be impossible to deny." His hands trembled as he picked up the papers, scanning the pages. The smugness, the arrogance, the untouchable aura, all gone. And in its place, a stark realization. He had miscalculated, underestimated me, and now his carefully curated image was collapsing. I took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. "Do you know what it feels like to be abandoned by someone who is supposed to protect you? To have the person you trusted the most turn against you? I've carried that for years, and now I'm reclaiming what's mine. Not just the truth, but my dignity." He said nothing, his silence louder than any protest. I watched him, feeling a mixture of vindication and sadness. Revenge had never been about cruelty. It was about justice. And justice, in this case, was finally served. When I left the study, I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. The betrayal still stung, but the weight of powerlessness had lifted. I had faced the man who had tried to erase me, exposed his lies, and emerged unbroken. The storm inside me had not destroyed me. It had strengthened me. Outside, the world felt sharper, clearer, more alive. I had survived the betrayal, navigated the deceit, and reclaimed my voice. And though scars remained, I finally understood. Some storms are necessary to wash away the weakness, and sometimes sweet revenge is the most honest form of closure.